check. I walked out of the house without my small headphones, so we've got the professional ones on today. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How about you?
Good, good, good.
How is Deacon Cole doing?
Deacon Cole is in the hospital.
Oh boy.
I was going to. I was actually going to. That was. That was the announcement. Um, so, and obviously you can't go see him. Nobody can visit him because he's COVID.
What hospital is he in?
He's in Framingham. He's
Oh,
in
he's in Framingham.
Metro
Okay.
West Framingham, yeah. And but like I said, you can't. Oh, hey, that's working. All right, I just shared it, and I'll turn the volume off. Everything is looking good. So, I don't know who else is going to be joining us. I didn't, and see, it was interesting today. I didn't. I usually spend time and share, a bunch of stuff, and I didn't do it this time because I figured people would automatically know, and that may have been a mistake.
Yeah, I was just getting on when you texted, so.
Oh, that's working. Okay. And I am going to make a comment on the. Okay. So it has been shared on the Facebook so people can contact. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tuesday night Bible study. I am Pastor Dan Walker. We're coming to you live from New Bethel Baptist Church. I've got Brother Tom on the Zoom, and we're going to carry on tonight with our study of Job. Do you remember the homework?
No, I did not.
And that's probably why nobody else joined, because the homework was too hard.
Oh.
Oh, well, I got to stop giving homework. I've got to learn my lesson. Stop giving homework.
To refresh my memory, what was I supposed to do?
Have you ever been in a situation where you look back on it and say, this had to be a test from God? Either that you passed or failed, and would you share it? That was the homework.
Well, I've had a couple of situations, and I'm not sure really if they were tests from God, but I know when my second son was born, he needed open heart surgery after 4 days well, they knew from the minute, well, within a couple hours after he was born that he was going to need open heart surgery because he had a heart defect. And it was well, I had peace with God throughout the whole ordeal. I prayed, of course, that my son, would survive, which he did. He's 25 years old and counting now, and but I also knew that I may have to prepare a funeral for an infant too. I didn't know how this was going to work out, but I just put my faith in God. And the way things turned out, after talking with people and a couple of decisions I made, my son ended up having the best doctor in the world operated on him. The best doctor for this particular operation operated on my son.
Wow.
And he was actually there was a doctor from Sweden who developed a procedure, and this doctor had been working with him almost from the beginning. And so he was absolutely the best doctor in the world to do this operation. And everything was fine. And I praise God for that.
That is a good testimony, and it is exactly what we're talking about here. So thank you for being topical and on point and for sharing. Um, there's been I've had numerous testings in my life where I believe that some of them are so blatant, and some of them are inappropriate, so that I can't share them with you, except to say that there were times when I was in places where I shouldn't have been, and I got out of there before stuff got silly. And there were times when I was spared from the silly just because I was spared from the silly. Um, there have been some situations in my life where I believe, looking back on it, that it was clearly God allowing me to be tested in that area to see how I was going to respond and what I was going to do. And if I failed, I could kind of tell because I had to go back and take the test again. And sometimes it was exactly the same scenario, just in a different venue. So those are so that is kind of how it worked for me. So we're in the book of Job, and one of the things that I said last week was that the book of Job is a book of wisdom. It's the first book of wisdom. There's also, and one of the things about the Bible I like is that every book has some aspects of other things in it. Like there are really 7 different types of books in the Bible: wisdom, poetry, history, and there's 3 others that I can't call. I'm just looking them up right now. I meant to look them up before I said it. And I didn't do that. I had it in a note, but I don't have the notes with me. Wisdom, Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Psalms, Song of Solomon, which is also called the Song of Songs, Lamentations, the Book of Prophecy, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. There are also books of history, Deuteronomy, Exodus, Numbers. And then there are some books that are difficult to specify because they have so much of different things in them. Job, I think, is one of those. Job is claimed to be a book of wisdom, but there's also a great deal of poetry in it. Psalms is considered a book of wisdom with an exceedingly amount of poetry in it and a great deal of history in Psalms. So just because a book has one particular title, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's all it's going to be in that book. Even the book of Numbers, which for me was one of the hardest books to get through because it really is what it says. There's still, if you read it carefully, there's still a great deal of wisdom in the book of Numbers. So if I remember correctly, we left off at verse 8, where we got Job 1, verse 8, where the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man who feareth God and shuns evil?" So then Satan answered the Lord, Does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou made a hedge? Hast thou made a hedge around him? And so I was trying to see if somebody was texting me because they were trying to get in. They're not. Hast thou made a hedge around him and about his house, and it is all about he has on every side, that thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and that his substance has increased. But put forth your hand now, touch all that he has, and he will curse thee to thy face. So I think we talked about the fact, because I think we were going to start at Satan at 13, when Job is accusing God of protecting. Satan is accusing God of protecting Job, and that's why Job serves him. But rather than Satan ask for permission to do everything, he tells God to put forth his hand and to strike Job. So, and I said to myself, I said last week that one of Satan's tricks is to get you to hurt yourself so he doesn't have to. I never forget that, now, old folk, when they get together, they like to scare kids. And when you come from the South, it's easy to have ghost stories because people kind of died where they fell, and sometimes they were buried and sometimes they weren't, and that whole bit. So the folklore in the South to say that there are ghosts walking around is pretty easy just because of that. And my uncle told the story of how he was walking down one of the country roads one day, and a white plank stood up as he was walking past it, kind of a mystic plank, and he got scared. He took off running. Well, the plank kind of followed him and got in his face and said, "You call that running?" So at that point, he just stopped and continued to walk and started talking with whatever spirit this was. And what I took from that and what he said was, ghosts, if there are such a thing, they can't hurt you, but they make you hurt yourself. They don't have the power of, unlike the movie Ghost, where there's a technique that apparitions can learn to muster their power and make physical changes in the real world. Unlike that's Hollywood. I don't think such things exist in the real life. I think if there is a spirit that is coming at you, you have way more power over it if you understand how to take control over the situation. And the only way to take control of the situation is, of course, to be prayed up, to understand that spirits can't hurt you and that you're a child of God. And any spirit that comes in your path that doesn't immediately identify itself as being from God is a demon, in which case you have complete control over him. So there's that. So Satan tries to get God to do his work for him. God, of course, is not having that. So in verse 12, and the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he has is in thy hand, is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thy hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. So Job is a person of many means, and he is a person who has great possessions. And we talked about that if we wanted to discover when Job lived, we can look at how his wealth was measured. It wasn't measured in silver and gold. It was measured in possessions: cattle, land, family members, servants. That was pretty much how your wealth was measured before, quote unquote, the gold standard. And Job had many possessions. So God is. So what do you think about this fact that God, God that Satan has tried to get God to do His work for him, and what God does in response to that? And remember that people cannot see your shrugs.
Yeah, I know. I'm pondering the question. Uh, God, um, like you say, God wasn't about to do what Satan wanted. However, God's will was going to be accomplished through Satan. And so that is why Satan needed permission from God to do anything to Job.
Correct. Absolutely spot on. Satan was trying to get God to do, like you said, His will, and God's never going to do the will of Satan. But God did allow Satan to do what he does. And I think, excuse me, I don't have a yawn button. And I think that it's telling in even today's world where there are times when God just gets out of the way and says, okay, if this is what you want, you can have it. And I think we're in a situation now where we're going to see exactly where that's going to go. And I'm fairly convinced that people are not going to like what they discover in a few short months. I think it's going to be very clear exactly what the situation was, because I'm already starting to see signs of things coming out now that should have been coming out a long time ago, but it didn't fit the purpose. Now the purpose has been accomplished, things are coming out because it's going to fit the higher purpose. And because I'm trying to keep this not from going political, I'll just leave it there for now. So Satan answered the Lord. So the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now, this is when starting at verse 13, he begins to lose everything. And interestingly enough, he starts with the family. And you had said that you weren't sure whether you were going to have to plan a funeral for your son. And I can't imagine what you were going through while that decision was being made or not made.
Well, it's those times when you're closest to God and you feel His presence the most, and it's you're just keenly aware of God's presence in a situation like that.
Yeah. If you are blessed and if you're smart and if you have been prayed up, then the weirder or the more devastating the situation becomes, the closer you're supposed to get to your power source. And we have to remember that that's the purpose for having a power source, so that we can get close to it.
I think my biggest tragedy in my life is the fact that it took something like that, or it takes things like that, to draw me that close to Him. I think we can be that close to Him all the time if we want to take the time and if we want to take the effort.
I think you're right. I think it's completely possible. And I'm almost ashamed to say it, but even as a pastor, there are times when I feel like if I could just be more, I could be closer. And, it's there's no rubric to it. There's no take a pill or whatever. You just have to fast and pray and study your word and keep your mind stayed on him. And you would think that those simple, you think it would be easier if they could just be a Bible pill, where you took a pill and you understood the Bible. You took another pill, you got the Holy Spirit. You took a third pill, and you're able to perform miracles, this, that, and the other. And it's unfortunately in this society, the gospel has somewhat become that for some people. You won't go where you're challenged. You won't stretch out. If you're belonging to a church and all of a sudden that church has an accountability group, you're not going anywhere near that accountability group or that church anymore, for fear that somebody might find you out, as if your sin is the worst sin on the planet and no one's ever heard of it before.
It's kind of interesting though. I read the Psalms, and I read the Psalms of David, and most of his Psalms were written when he was under duress, and he was under duress quite a bit.
Right.
Being chased by Saul, and then his own son rebelled against him, and he wrote his most beautiful Psalms when he was under duress, and then after God delivered him, all the Psalms of praise. But he got himself in trouble when there was like calm and peace in his life, and his troops were out the war, the kingdom was established, everything was going well, and he's hanging around the palace, and that's when he got in trouble. It's almost like, and it's so typical of how we as human beings are, is actually a great evil in us, that we can pray to God and God delivers us, and we can thank him and we can praise him, and then we can turn on him on a dime.
Right. Absolutely. And you see, you've nailed it. That's the key. When things are going right and everything is done, you're sitting back. We used to say fat, dumb, and happy, but we can't say fat, dumb, and happy anymore, because you're body shaming, or you're whatever the current phrase is for calling somebody dumb. You can't say those things anymore, but that's the key. A little stress, a little strife keeps us closer to God. And you're absolutely right. David's best, last night we had Bible study, the advanced Bible study class, which we have on every Monday night, where I don't film it, I don't stream it. It is strictly getting into the Word deeper and below, and just digging through it. And one of the things that came out is that David wrote very flourished, praising psalms. He wrote very firm, praising things in First Chronicles, before his fall. After his fall, the psalms his writings that are recorded in Psalms, especially Psalm 51, are way more heartfelt, and they're longer and they're deeper. The stuff that he wrote, it was nice, it was pretty, it was praising, but it didn't really have a lot of, I want to say depth is probably the word. That may not be the right word, but it's what word I'm coming up with for how he truly felt about God. But after he messed up so badly, he was like able to tap into a truer nature of himself and of who God is and who God should be in his life. And I don't think that he is different than anybody else in that situation. Just what you said. And they say pressure bursts a pipe, and if you want to find out how somebody is made, turn the heat up. And we know this to be the case, otherwise drill sergeants wouldn't have a job. Their goal is to push you to your breaking point and beyond, to see if you can in fact break. And if you're breaking, then they can reshape, if you can be reshaped. Some people break and they're broke, and that's the end of it. And this is what is about to happen to Job. He's about to be pushed to a place where anybody could break, and nobody could blame him for breaking. But he does something miraculous, and what he does annoys Satan, because Satan doesn't get it. What happens in verse 13, he says, now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the older brother's house. A messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. There's a couple things I've often been concerned about that I alone have escaped. It just seems to me that if he was a proper servant, he should have been out there fighting to protect the other people. That was the thing that struck me. He had
Yes, but if you chicken out and run away, you live to chicken out another day.
Yes, I hear that. And we've all had instances where running away or choosing not to fight at that moment is the prudent thing. While he was speaking, another came and said, the fire of God fell from the heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, also came another, said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, and yes, killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I have alone to escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, a 4th servant came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking in their older brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness, struck the 4 corners of the house. It fell on the young people. They are all dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So now, in a brief instant, everything that Job had, except his wife and his own personal possessions, his home and stuff like that, have been taken from him. And nobody could really blame him or anybody for falling apart at that moment. Some of us can't take any kind of, you get a flat tire and they're going off the deep end. You know, I don't know how many times we've been in a situation where I've seen people who have bumped into somebody else's car, and you got to separate them from fist fighting. And you look at the bumper on both cars and you don't see a scratch. It's like, what is going, how much power we have put in our possessions is just scary. But Job loses everything. He loses his family, he loses his possessions, he even loses some property because the house falls down. All of his enemies, the Chaldeans, the Sabaeans, who I don't think were ever allowed to attack Job or bother Job in the past because of God's hedge of protection around him. These people are having a field day, except for these 4 servants who seem to be able to escape so that they can tell Job what's going on. I find it curious that in verse 16, he says, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. Why would he say the fire of God? Is it because he didn't understand, or because in his limited understanding, good things and bad things come from heaven? So since he was a believer, the fire of God, that's all he knew. He didn't know what was really going on. So he would have to assume, rightly so, that God was doing all this.
So the fire of God, would that be a severe thunderstorm or something? And lightning, or
it could have been lightning storm. It could have been a thunderstorm. It could have been anything. What we do know is that it says burned up the sheep and the servants. So maybe it was a lava blast or anything that could do it. So someone says severe lightning, which would work. One of the commentaries said severe lightning, and that could certainly explain it, because lightning hits things and fire starts. Lightning can hit the ground, hit sheep, and people die. Absolutely. But this is still just man describing with his understanding what's going on, and as limited as it is, but it's still him describing it. So, and then Job's response to this was he rose, he tore his robe, he shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And verse 22 said, in all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. Which is exactly what Satan said that he would do. He said, if you let me take his stuff from him, he's going to curse you to your face. And Job has, I don't know why I am yawning. I think I may need some water. Sometimes if my oxygen levels go down, I start yawning. So his prayer, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. How many of us could truly say that? That's a tough one.
That is, I'm not sure I could.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah. And I'm not sure I could. You got to be a special kind of person to say stuff like that, because God has a way of holding you to what you say. I didn't understand the idle word theory, where you really shouldn't be saying a bunch of idle words, because God has a way of holding you to some of those stupid things you say.
So does your wife.
Roll says he can't get in. All right, let me, I'm typing to Roll right now. Actually, I'll just tell him out loud. Did you use the passcode capital NBBC? Capital New Bethel Baptist Church. So that should let you in. Try that. So Rolf's trying to come in. And like you said, I'm not sure I could say it either. There are times when I have been able to shrug off certain disasters. And there are times when we do shrug off certain disasters, but this is not just a flat tire in the middle of the highway or a motor seizing up as you're on your way. This is not that. This is total losing of everything that you hold dear, starting with your family. And the fact that he tears his robe, that's a tradition that one does when he's in pain. He rents his garment. This is a very old Jewish tradition, to tear your robe. So we have that situation. I'm trying to see if Roll is able to do it. I'm going to text him.
Yeah, it's the same meeting number and password.
Right. is the passcode.
Hey,
There. Okay.
hey, Walter's here.
Walter's here. Hey, how you doing?
Better late than never.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good to see you.
Good to be here.
I'm just taking a break for just a second while I try to get Roll in. He's trying to come in. Oh, I just said is the Roll. Oh my goodness. Is the passcode. My idea to make it easier. There he is.
He's coming.
There he is. My idea to make it easier, as always, has a way of biting me in the you know where.
Hello?
Roll?
Can you hear me?
I hear you, yeah. I hear you. Your audio is kind of flaky.
Okay. Sorry.
But I hear you.
Okay. Okay.
So do you remember the homework from last week? You can say no because neither did Tom. The homework.
Oh, no, I don't. No.
Okay, the homework was: did you ever go through a situation where, looking back on it, you believe now that it was a test from God, or God was allowing you to be tested? Did you hear?
Yeah, the short
The short answer is
yes.
okay.
Yeah. In retrospect, as I look back over certain situations, but most of the time it's looking back and just seeing how God was there and where He was there. Now, whether the experience itself was a test is another situation. But I mean, I look back over things that happened where I didn't realize it was God at the time. But in retrospect, and looking back, it became clear to me it was God that was doing and moving and causing things to happen.
Right. And we're up to the point where Job has lost everything, and he's made the verse 22, verse 21, and verse 22, where he says, "Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return." And we say that even now, a different version of it. We say, "You can't take none of it with you." So these people who have more than they ever are going to spend in one lifetime, they can't take any of it with them. And when they die, their relatives fight over, what they had. So if they're coveting it, the covetousness doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't do them any good, and it certainly doesn't do the family any good afterwards. Especially if lawyers get involved, because the lawyers end up with the lion's share of whatever their family is fighting over. So we started chapter 2, and the Bible says, in all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he charge God with wrong. And I think that part right there is important to understand, that what Job had said is, look, this all came from God, so he took it all back, so what am I complaining about? And that's a big one, if you say, and it's not a situation where you do something that causes you to lose. Let's say God allows you to get a brand new car, your credit is toe up from the flow up, and you just happen to catch the dealership at the right perfect time, and you're able to get this brand new car. And some would say, well, God made sure I could get it, or they set it up for me to get. But then 2 months or 3 months down the line, when it's repossessed, they would be charging, oh, well, why did God let me get this? He knew I couldn't pay for it. You understand what I'm saying? Is that, have you ever heard such people say things like that? If you're not,
Yeah, sometimes people should they should stop trying to blame God for their own bad decisions.
I think that's accurate. I think that's absolutely accurate. And in this situation, none of these things that had happened to Job were of his own making. I guess Roll is having some issues, technical issues, with getting in. Chapter 2, again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also and presented himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" And Satan answered the Lord, saying, "Going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." Now, this is kind of where we started last week, where I actually was in the wrong point, in the wrong section. But the thing that stands out to me in this, it says, "Although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." And I said this earlier, and I guess it gets backed up here. Satan tried to get God to do his work, dirty work for him. And God says, "You tried to get me to do what you wanted to do, and there was no reason for it to happen." But now Satan is not giving up. He says to the Lord, "Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life, but you stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." Once again, Satan is trying to get God to do what Satan wants done, and God turns it or flips it on him and says, "Behold," verse 6, Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." So Satan went out to the presence of the Lord, and he struck Job with painful boils, and from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head, and he took a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of ashes. So basically, he took a piece of pottery to scrape the scabs off of his body in the way of a soothing thing. And I can tell you that I understand this part because I am plagued with itches and things like that. And sometimes I have to take cream for it and all that stuff. But scratching is very soothing, even though it's equally destructive. So I get the concept here very much so. And now we have this is the first time we hear from his wife. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." Now, I found it curious that in all of the stuff that Satan took away from Job, he left his wife. And I don't know how many sermons have been made from this point here. And I don't know if I'm going to get myself in trouble with elaborating on it. But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks," which also tells me that they had foolish women back in those times. And we kind of know what he means when he says that. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Why that's mentioned that way is because his wife said, "Curse God and die." In other words, his wife is trying to get him to use his mouth to tell God off. And the dying is metaphorical. It's not so much curse God and drop dead. It's more like once you curse God, then you're going to be dead to God. And since he's not doing you many favors right now, what's the big deal why are you still worshiping him? Do you still hold fast to your integrity? In other words, why are you being upright and honorable with him? And clearly, he's giving you the short end of the stick.
But Pastor, if I could, I have a little bit of a different take on that. In that, maybe when she told him to curse God and die, it's because he was suffering so much. I mean, clearly we know the story. He had all this stuff. Now he's got all the suffering, and she was, I think, maybe doing that so that he wouldn't suffer. It's like seeing a person who had everything. Now all of a sudden they lost everything. They're suffering. She sees no hope for him. So she's saying, as a matter of mercy, curse God and die, which is just interesting because implicit in that is the cursing of God will kill you.
Okay.
But I don't think that she was doing it out of any kind of benevolent motivation. I think she thinks she was helping him by telling him to do that.
And I've heard that school of thought before. I'm not in a position to argue for it or against it. So I think it's a legitimate position. As his wife, she doesn't want to see the one that she loves suffer. So she's trying to find a most expedient way for him not to suffer anymore. So that is, as I said, that's a legitimate point. You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? Essentially, what he is saying is that, good stuff happens, bad stuff happens. He can't do it from the laptop, and he has problems with the phone, too. Okay, all right, understandable. Another time, that was Roll. He was texting me to say he can't do it. He's having a problem with his phone. So, what do you think, Tom?
About curse God and die?
The wife position, yes. You think it's coming from benevolence? Do you think it's coming from, in other words, is she being helpful, hurtful, or some combination thereof?
I think I'm just wondering if it's like shake your fist at God. Curse God, shake your fist at him, and maybe even kill yourself. In that respect, and die.
Wow.
or I'm looking at this commentary. Yes, God will end your life for blaspheming him, is what one of these commentaries say. But as far as I think cursing God is, shake your fist at God, curse him, blaspheme, and then maybe he'll kill you, he'll take your life,
And you'll be out of the pain.
Right. And it's almost like at this point you got nothing to lose. Like she's given up on God.
Right. And I think there certainly a case could be made for that, because the question she asks him is, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Do you still believe in this God that you've been worshiping all this time? Do you still believe that, he's such a great character? Now when Job's 3 friends heard all of his adversity that had come upon him, each one of them came from his old place. Eliphaz the Temanite. Oh my goodness! I remember a little kid said Eliphaz the termite. They thought it was a kid's story. Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite. For they had made an appointment to come together and to mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept, and each one of them tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward the heavens. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him for they saw that his grief was very great. So, this in and of itself, I remember coming up through the ranks, and one of the teachers, one of my Bible teachers, said to me, Dan, those three people, Zophar, Eliphaz, and Bildad, were they Job's friends? And I said, no, they're not his friends. And the pastor asked me, well, why aren't they his friends, Dan? And I gave some elaborate answer as to their advice was useless. They didn't really do this much for him, and blah, blah, blah. And then he said to me something that remains to this day, which is one of the reasons I'm such a stickler on it. What does the Bible say? And
they were his friends.
And the Bible describes them as his friends. So that settles it. And for me, that's kind of one of those things that, as I said, it's been a lesson that I've remained to this day, because if the Bible calls them his friends, who am I to second guess what the Bible says? Just because I didn't like what they did, or my assessment of their friendship was severely different than what the Bible said. Bible says, now then, Job's three friends heard all his adversity that had come upon him, and each one came from his own place. They had made an appointment to come together and to mourn with him, to comfort him. They raised their eyes from afar. They didn't even recognize him, which means those sores and all that stuff that was on him. Some people say it was a form of eczema and seborrhea that was on him. They couldn't recognize who he was. And the idea that they sat with him 7 days and 7 nights and no one said a word, that's difficult to understand even in today's world. I know that when you go to a funeral, and as a pastor, people expect you to say something. And you got to say words of comfort, or you got to do this, you got to do that. And sometimes you can't, because the person that had passed was not a very good person. You know, and the circumstances of their death wasn't all that honorable. You know, I had a person who I thought was a good friend, and when he died, he actually had died of something that is very shameful. And so they didn't announce what he had died of at his homegoing, at his wake. But once we'd all come together, we all said nice things about him and blah blah blah. Come to find out that this person didn't like us. He had kept diaries and kept books and stuff where he had, pretty much ragged on each one of us who we thought we were all his friends, and he really didn't care much about us at all. Not to mention his death, as I said, was somewhat a shameful type of way of dying. So the idea that these three people come together and they sit with him and don't say anything should have been proof that they are in fact someone that cared about him.
Yeah. And I think that their reaction again is similar to the wife. They saw him, like the scripture, like it says, before they got there, they could see that he had been suffering.
Right.
I mean, they were absolutely speechless in terms of what they saw, and so what do you say if you're a friend? What do you say in that circumstance? And they did what I think all they could do, which was nothing.
Right.
They just sat with him and just said, so what can you say? He's the one that's doing all the suffering. What can you say? And that's why I think for the wife, because of her position, because that's her husband, she wanted him to stop suffering. And these guys came and they see him suffering, and clearly he was in a bad way. That's what these guys saw.
Right.
I mean, he was in a bad way, such a bad way where they couldn't even respond to it. All they could do is just kind of be there.
Right. And logistical, the concept of sitting silently for 7 days and 7 nights. Just the whole. Well, I guess I'm just too human sometimes, because I'm thinking that in a week, it never says that they ate, it never says that they slept, it just said that they came and sat down, and they all just sat there for 7 days, and it might have gone 7 more days if Job doesn't open his mouth. Job is the first one to speak here.
But I think, this is my take on it anyway. I think it's probably safe to assume that they ate, and they took care of their bodily functions and all that stuff. You know, they weren't just kind of sitting in a lotus position for 7 days. So I think that I think they were together in this place under this circumstance for 7 days, basically. I think that's how I would read it. I don't think it was necessarily they became something that was superhuman.
Okay. And that's a good place to end, because we're going to start chapter 3 on next time we get together on next Tuesday. So I want to thank you for joining. We're in Job chapter 1 and 2. We Deacon Cooper, and thank you for this past weekend. You came out and you were just such a blessing to the outreach. It wasn't funny. I just want to thank you publicly and give you your flowers while you can smell them, such as they are.
Well, let me say back at you, Pastor. It was a blessing for me, and I'll tell you, it was the intensity of the ministry, and you were at a place where that kind of ministry was needed and called for, and you go to places, Pastor Dan, that others won't go. So I don't say that to give you credit. I say that because that's how God operates. We don't all have the same gifts. We're all called to different things. But I believe you're faithful to your calling. And so it's a privilege for me to participate with you. And clearly it's all about ministry. And when we're in it, we know it, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And it was fun seeing people out there worshiping and ministering, and the songs and the outreach. And the second half of the video was completely lost forever. I guess it was supposed to be. Only the first 45 minutes that got streamed I've been able to find. It was streamed in 2 sections. The second part was almost 45, was a little bit more than that as well. And I went to copy it, and it disappeared. I don't know how or what. It's just in the Ethernet. I tried copying it to my OneDrive, and it just gone. So I guess when those situations happen, they're supposed to be. But the ministry was what was important, and that's what happened. I'm looking forward to the next time God tells me to do something, and we do it. I'm sure the snow will be on the ground by then. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to study one of your servants. This is one of the best life lessons in the entire book of the Bible about human suffering, human loss, tragedy, loved ones, family, and friends, and how we are to react when things are going wrong, and how do we lose everything and not sin? How do we keep our faith stayed on the Lord? Are we able to say, naked I came into this world, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord? I think that should be one of our daily prayers. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And we thank you for the participants, and we ask now that you stay with us and keep your hedge of protection around us. We know that this is just a really weird time in the world right now. And we ask these things in the precious name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Pastor, I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Yes. Sounds like a plan. All right.
Terrific.
I'm going to...
Good night, Tom.
Good night, Brother
Good
Tom.
night. Good night, everyone.
We hope to see you next week. Hopefully your connections will be better. And
Yeah. Yeah, for me, this was just a one-time thing. Anyway,
Well,
have
no,
a good night.
it's a bad weather out there is horrible, so I think that has a lot to do with it. All right,
Yeah.
good night. I'm gonna go.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
So long.
I'm gonna go shut it off. Oh, end meeting for all. There we go.